Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined by my trusted colleague, Wes Hodkiewicz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. Wes, the 2022 NFL Draft is in the rearview mirror. The Packers made 11 selections over the course of the 3 days. We're going to spend some time here breaking things down in terms of just what the Packers got as far as we can tell right now. Obviously, we won't really know for maybe another year or two or more as to what this draft class really adds up to. But you have to start on the defensive side of the ball because Brian Gutekunst had 2 picks in the first round at 22 and at 28. Did not make a trade in the first round, stayed at those 2 spots and picked 2 defenders from Georgia's national championship unit. And of course, I'm talking about linebacker Quay Walker, defensive lineman Devonte Wyatt. Just initially, your thoughts on those 2 guys being added to a Packers defense that, as we all know, was playing pretty darn well at the end of the 2021 season.
It's true, Mike, and I'm not the kind of person that's going to sit here and pour Diet Coke down your back and tell you it's not raining. I wasn't looking a lot at Walker throughout this process, and that has nothing really to do with Walker. It has more to do with the fact that, as much as we've talked about the receiver position, how long it's been since they've drafted one in the first round, it had been 16 years since they'd taken an inside linebacker. So I'd seen some good options on the board over the years, but once I got into Thursday, and it started with my good friend Pete Doherty, that was actually his pick for the Green Bay Press-Gazette. We had talked about him a little bit. I started to kind of dive into him a little bit more. So at the time in which the Packers finally did select him, I actually went, you know what, that made a lot of sense. This guy's a tall, rangy athlete. And when you look at what the Packers typically look for in their draft picks, one, it's athleticism. I mean, you look at all those metrics and those newfound kind of analytics that talk about the athleticism factor of Green Bay, what they look for in their picks. But realistically, it's also the application of it and what he was able to do in Georgia's defense and how he projects at the next level. And when I close my eyes and I start to mentally visualize him standing next to Devonte Campbell, it's not even just about the fact that they haven't had 2 linebackers like that. They haven't had 2 athletes with those builds and that kind of sideline-to-sideline speed, at least during my time on the beat and extending well before that. We could talk about Wyatt too, but I mean, first and foremost, the fact that the Packers did finally jump at an inside backer, the more you look at the Quay Walker selection, the more it made more sense to me.
Yeah, Walker is one of these players that's interesting because it happens every year in the draft. Sometimes it's even with multiple players where he's a player at a certain position where there are other guys in the country, and in this case, actually another guy on his own team at Georgia, who got all of the accolades, the Butkus Award, the postseason honors, all of these kinds of things. There were a couple of other guys in this drafted inside linebacker who got all of that attention. So they, in all of the mock drafts and all of the analysts were putting those guys up there as first-round draft picks. Then, as you got to the last few days before the draft, suddenly this name Quay Walker started popping up. And the way it's portrayed in the media is, Quay Walker is rising up draft boards. Well, no, he's been on the draft boards of NFL teams this whole time where he is. It's that reporters and analysts are finding out more about what these teams actually think of this guy. And so he's rising on their boards because of what they're learning through their channels and connections as to what's going on in the actual NFL draft rooms. And so when the draft did arrive on Thursday night, there were plenty of people who were saying that Quay Walker very likely could be a first-round pick. And then as it turned out, the Packers made him the first inside linebacker to come off the board. When I look at these 2 picks in tandem, so to speak, Walker and Wyatt at 22 and 28, excuse me, I look at these as companion picks in a sense because Quay Walker sort of becomes the companion to Devonte Campbell at inside linebacker with Joe Barry and his scheme and wanting to keep 2 inside linebackers on the field from a matchup perspective as much as possible. Devonte Wyatt kind of becomes the companion to Kenny Clark. The Packers haven't really drafted a defensive lineman with the size, athleticism, pass rush ability, that whole package that Kenny Clark brings they haven't really drafted a guy with that type of profile now until they've drafted Wyatt. So it's sort of like I see the middle of the Packers defense potentially developing into these two pairs of players, the two guys up front, the two at inside linebacker. I think that's how they'd like to see it develop. Obviously, with these guys being rookies, we just have to see exactly how it goes.
Absolutely. But Wyatt was the one I think I was most excited about. And again, that's nothing against Walker, but Wyatt's the one that I think even going back to February, I had my eye on because
I did too, and I'll be honest, when the Packers did not take Wyatt at 22, and Brian Gutekunst even said so, he thought they had probably given up their chance to get him, figuring he would go somewhere between 22 and 28, but he was still there at 28, so they took him.
And when you had Trayvon Walker, you had Jordan Davis. Those were two of the guys that I think got a lot of the accolades, got a lot of the attention. But you can't discount what Wyatt did in that Georgia defense and what he sort of provided to them. And I think there's a reason why when scouts and pundits and draftniks, they were talking about this draft, they said that this Wyatt kid might have as high of an upside as anybody. And when you break down the film and when you look at the numbers with him, a 4.77 40, that's about a quarter of a second faster than what Kenny Clark ran coming out of UCLA 6 years ago now. He isn't as big as Kenny, but he's not that far off. And, and he's the kind of guy that's going to be able to play basically any spot on the defensive front, in the defensive line, in any package. And ultimately, I think that's what Green Bay really needed, Mike. They had defensive linemen that could play in the early downs. They had defensive linemen who could play on third down. But unlike Clark and unlike Lowry, they didn't have somebody that could potentially just be on the field at any given time. This allows them to get a deeper rotation going on the defensive line while also giving them the best middle of a defense that I think they've had over the last 10 years. I mean, I think you would have to go back to 2010 when, you had the Ryan Pickett's and the B.J. Rajis and the Johnny Jollies with, Nick Barnett behind him, A.J. Hawk behind him, for the last time they've had a unit like this. So the kid's going to need time to develop. You're not going to be able to expect him to come in. Kenny Clark needed time back in 2016, but he's a great investment piece at a position in which the Packers hadn't invested anything higher than a third-round pick since they drafted Clark 6 years ago.
Right, exactly. Well, the Packers also took 3 other players on the defensive side of the ball before this draft was over. The first one coming at the end of the 5th round, South Carolina edge rusher Kingsley, apparently he goes by JJ, Enagbare. Now this is an interesting guy because he wasn't somebody who statistically jumped off the page in terms of 2021. But you look at what this young man did in 2020, the COVID-shortened season. In, I believe it was 8 games for South Carolina, he had 6 sacks and 3 forced fumbles in 8 games. And he was first-team All-SEC that season. Now, he didn't stay there as first-team SEC in 2021. Of course, that's one heck of a league in college football. But he still was pretty solid in 2021. And the Packers envision this young man not only potentially to help on special teams with his body type and his speed, but at the edge rusher position, we had talked about it leading into the draft. You have Preston Smith, you have Rashawn Gary. Those are your 2 starters. The Packers are looking for Randy Ramsey to come back from the injury that cost him all of last year. They have Jonathan Garvin, Ladarius Hamilton, and Tipa Naliai, guys who have all shown something. They've all flashed something, and they've contributed here and there over the course of the last couple years. But none of those guys has really established himself as a Mr. Reliable, like, okay, this guy's a bona fide proven NFL producer, right? So Enagbare gets thrown into that competition right now for the number 3 and 4 outside linebacker spots in new position coach Jason Rebrovich's rotation. He's got a chance to make some noise early here. We'll see what happens. But those 3 and 4 spots at edge rusher for the Packers are wide open as far as I see it.
Yeah, and it's going to be a long season for me going Enagbare and then Rebrovich back to back in terms of trying to make sure I make all those pronunciations happen.
Yeah, I'm sure that I've already botched him a couple of times.
But here's the thing, Mike, and I don't want to oversimplify this thing, but I really do think in Kingsley's case that if this young man runs a 40 that's maybe 0.15 seconds faster, I think you're looking at definitely a day 2 pick and maybe even bordering on round one, because he has everything else you want. As you mentioned, the production dipped a bit, but he is what you look for when you draw up a 3-4 outside backer. He has the size, he has the determination, and I think he's going to be able to hold up the edge with his strength.
It did seem to be the slow 40 time from what was out there that maybe dropped him, that he was available all the way at the end of the 5th round.
Yeah, and I'm not discounting that 40s don't mean something. Certainly you look at Rashawn Gary 3 years ago, that 40, not that it's everything in his game, but you can see that explosivity.
Right.
And it does show up on the field. But it also, they're not asking this guy to run routes. They're asking him to play football. And when you're looking about deepening out a rotation, I talked about George Karlaftis being a guy I really had my eye on. I just felt like there needed to be somebody that they got in this draft that could give them a new option, a draft pick, a guy that has some potential, a guy that has some accolades at the college level. And Kingsley really gives you that perspective here. I'm really excited about the pick. I'm really looking forward to get a chance to meet him. He sounds like a really, affable kid, and a really interesting individual. So his personality obviously is indicative of that JJ nickname. And I think, when you're looking at for Packers people and guys that can come in and really gel with a locker room, I don't know him, but just listening to him talk and learning a little bit about his story at South Carolina, he does seem like somebody that'll fit in really well with Preston Smith and Rashawn Gary.
Yeah, well, then in the 7th round, 2 other defenders who were added, both of them where the term size jumps out at you. Tariq Carpenter, 6'3", 230-pound safety, maybe a hybrid safety linebacker type. And then also Carpenter from Georgia Tech, and then on the defensive line, Jonathan Ford, 330-pound, I believe 6'5", if I remember correctly. 6'5", 330 defensive lineman from Miami. Carpenter, certainly a guy that I think the Packers are looking at to see what he might be able to bring to special teams for the return and the coverage units with that body type. Ford is just another classic run plugger, right? I mean, whether you grab a guy like Tyler Lancaster as an undrafted free agent, or a 330-pound defensive lineman late in the 7th round of the draft, kind of the same type of thing in terms of what you're looking for that guy to do.
Can you move him? Is the question, and obviously it's bigger than that. And Jerry Montgomery would be the first one to tell you that. But what I look at when I see Jonathan Ford is, this is a man that if he gets his pad level where it needs to be, he is going to be just a roadblock for offensive linemen to be able to get off his spot, because he has everything. He has the size. I think you look at his time, at Miami, the tackle numbers probably weren't as high as you'd think they would be for a guy that's played in 50 games, started 30 games. But, as Brian Gutekunst said after the draft, he thinks this guy, even though he's a little bit older, still has his best football ahead of him, still has some room to grow, and getting him in that line with those defensive linemen, there's a lot of, determination and being able to really kind of figure out the next step there. I think he's going to learn a lot from that group. Carpenter's a guy I'm really excited about, because I think it goes beyond just the defense. Yes, 6'3", 230 pounds. That's an interesting body type. A lot, and I actually think his pro day kind of wowed some people. I mean, the kid didn't get a combine invite, but at his pro day, I think he was running in the 4.5s. I mean, he put up some intriguing numbers for a guy that could potentially be a linebacker. The Packers are going to start him here at safety, but let's be honest. I mean, for a 7th round pick coming in here, his first goal is going to be special teams.
Yep.
And when you think about special teamers, Mike, I wrote about this in Insider Inbox this week. On paper, this guy reminds me a lot of Sean Richardson. And Sean's a kid that he would have played in this league a lot longer than he did had it not been for the neck injuries. Right. But when the Packers signed him out of Vanderbilt, he was the safety when Casey Hayward was there. He was kind of an afterthought, but at 6'2", 220 pounds, he brought them something on special teams, because you can use that type of body type, that type of speed in so many different capacities. That's what I'm looking for from Carpenter. Can he be that type of player? Because if he can, there's a lot of money to be made in this league as far as that being your launching off point.
Yeah, I thought the comp you made with Richardson was a good one, and Richardson was an undrafted player, and Carpenter, a late 7th round guy. So I want to shift to the offensive side of the ball, but we'll take care of some sponsor business here first, Wes. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone. like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl, cousin subs. We believe in better.
And if I may, Enagbare.
I know. It's going to be a hard one to learn.
I'm going to go home at night, kind of like when you used to be doing, like, you preparing for your spelling bee or whatever at school. I'm just going to sit there and just keep writing that out and spelling it.
Yeah.
Enagbare.
Enagbare. On the offensive side, as we mentioned, the Packers obviously used their 2 first-round picks. On the defensive side of the ball, they went into the second round of the draft on Friday night with picks at number 53 and number 59. And surprise, 2 picks into the action on Friday night, the Packers were on the board because Brian Gutekunst decided to package both of those second-round picks in the 50s to move all the way up to number 34 to select Christian Watson, the wide receiver out of North Dakota State. Your initial impressions of the move and the price the Packers paid to get this young man.
Do you remember what I said in Inbox last week? You had to edit it. Do you remember my line?
I don't remember exactly.
I liked him as a first-round pick. I loved him as a second-round pick because I thought that's where the value was.
And it's funny because we talked on this show about, would the Packers trade to the 36th spot, high in the second round, which was the spot where they got Jordy Nelson. What would that be, 14 years ago now, Jordy Nelson being drafted 36th overall in 2008. But close enough, right? Number 34, and the Packers once again draft a second-round receiver.
And I've said this before, but I truly mean it. I feel like this guy, Christian Watson, was a lot more like those first 6 receivers that got taken in the top 18 than the 6 that got taken immediately after him in the second round. He has everything you want. 6'4", 208 pounds, runs a 4.3 640. I think somewhere around 38.5-inch vertical, if I got that number right. The kid is an athlete. He scores above off the charts. I think in terms of the receiver position, one of the most athletic receivers and players that the Packers have taken in the modern era when you look at all of his scores. And here's the other thing. He is a fast climber and a kid that had a late growth spurt, and I feel like this is going to be the type of player that's going to come into Green Bay, is really going to benefit from the veteran leadership around him. North Dakota State, the guy was a big playmaker, downfield target, and there is a huge catch radius to work off of. Rome will not be built in a day. We know how things go with receivers in Green Bay.
Right.
But in terms of finally getting that prospect, I know it wasn't a first rounder or whatever, but this kid has what you look for when you talk about the lineage of Randall Cobb, Greg Jennings, Jordy Nelson, Devonte Adams in the second round. He has all the measurables to be the next great one.
Yeah, to me it's interesting how this played out, and the fans have been asking in inbox, well, it sounds like the Packers sure gave up a lot to get that 34th pick and all of that. And that is certainly true. I mean, the trade charts say that the Vikings won the trade. But here's the thing. Brian Gutekunst knows that. He knows what the numbers are going to say, right? So how do you? I think what you have to do is you have to evaluate it from our outside perspective to say that just tells you how much Brian Gutekunst liked this young man and wanted this young man to be his receiver selection in this draft. I totally agree with you with what you said about the guys who were drafted in the first round, because there were 6 receivers taken in a span of 11 picks from number 8 to number 18 in the first round. Those 11 picks, 6 receivers were taken. The Packers were there at 22. Though none of those top 6 guys fell to Green Bay at 22, and Gutekunst did not make a move up in order to get one. The Packers sat with the 2 picks in the 50s. We saw a handful of receivers get picked in the 50s, like right in that range. Gutekunst knew he could have gotten one of those guys, and maybe even gotten 2 of them, or gotten one of those guys and an extra player if he stays with his 2 picks in the 50s. He didn't want to do that. Why? Because he liked this guy as much as he does, and I think that's how you have to look at it. Now, as you said, Rome won't be built in a day in terms of Christian Watson's NFL career in this Matt LaFleur offense with Aaron Rodgers and everything else. But this was the guy that the Packers had when those first 6 were gone by the 18th pick. This was the guy the Packers had who was far and away the best receiver prospect in their minds. And Brian Gutekunst, he didn't care that the charts were going to say he lost the trade to the Minnesota Vikings. He wanted his guy. He was going to make sure that he got him. and to get him in here with Al Lazard, Randall Cobb, Sammy Watkins, and see what he can do in this offense, not only in the beginning but over the course of time, because we've all seen what did Jordy Nelson do over time, what did Randall Cobb, what did Devonte Adams do. None of those guys set the world on fire as rookies necessarily. This guy, Christian Watson, is going to have the opportunity as a rookie that those other guys didn't have because of the way the receiver room was constructed when they arrived. The Packers are in a different place at wide receiver. He's going to have the opportunity to do both, to show what he can do as a young man and what he can do down the road.
We know how we do 3 things with Larry, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to give you 3 things right now. Number 1, if you mocked Christian Watson to the Packers in the first round at 22 or 28, you do not have a say in if the Packers gave up too much to take him in the second round.
That's right.
I'm telling you that right now. There's been way too much of this.
Yeah.
Did they give up too much for him? You guys wanted to take him at 22. How is that giving up too much for him? They got 2 other prospects still. Okay, moving on from that. This guy, Mike, in terms of the receiver position, when you ask about opportunities, you want opportunities coming into the National Football League. For Christian Watson, the 6 returning veterans, and the other 2 rookies that they took that we'll talk about here momentarily. There's 9 guys that are either been drafted in the NFL or played in NFL games right now on the roster. That is a golden opportunity. It's a golden opportunity to make this 53. It's a golden opportunity to start week 1. You play this game for chances to solidify yourself, to prove yourself, to show everybody you are what you personally believed you are. There were a lot of years in Green Bay where you knew going into the season it's going to be Jordy Nelson, Randall Cobb, Devonte Adams, James Jones. Flip those 2.
Right.
Depending on what year you're looking at. And then that's where a bulk of the 11 personnel, that's where a bulk of the snaps are going to go. If any young guy, or even a veteran, plays well in training camp, looks good during the offseason program, shows out during preseason, you're going to play this year. And that has to be motivating. If that doesn't motivate you, nothing will, because as much as everybody wants to talk about the Packers don't have receivers, whatever, this is a chance, once that game 1 starts to game 17, to show everyone that the Packers receiving corps is who they thought they were.
Well, and the Packers didn't stop there, of course, at wide receiver. Brian Gutekunst adding 2 more before the end of the draft. He gets Romeo Doubs from Nevada in the 4th round, Samori Toure from Nebraska by way of Montana in the 7th round. And both of these guys, Wes, really interesting prospects in my mind, because certainly Doubs, and there's been all this confusion as to whether it's pronounced Dobbs or Dubs, and apparently
he's cool with both.
Yeah, he's actually fine with both, because apparently Dubs was kind of a nickname. Dobbs is what he says is the way it's supposed to be pronounced, but he really doesn't care either way.
Kind of like Spofford.
Not exactly, but anyway. So we'll go with Dobbs, but another guy with the size that the Packers look for at the position, right? 6'2",
Absolutely.
About 200 pounds. But also the production was there. This is, yes, it's the Mountain West Conference, not a Power 5 league, but back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons for this young man out of Nevada. And then you look at Toure, he came originally from the FCS from Montana, where he had like off-the-chart numbers, like 1,400 and some yards. I mean, just had a decorated career for 3 years at Montana, then lost the season to COVID because the FCS schools did not play in 2020. So then he decides for one final year of eligibility to go to Nebraska to challenge himself in the Big Ten. And he produces.
He did.
Produces on a Nebraska team to then, to raise his stock, raise his profile to where then he does get drafted in the 7th round as opposed to having to wait for a free agent contract. But these two receivers, very interesting prospects, and I'm really curious. I'm really curious about Dobbs, because this is a guy that, I'll be honest, I didn't really know much about. I hadn't paid that much attention to as many of the receiver prospects in the middle rounds. But you look at what he did. You look at what he did in the college game, and you look at the size-speed combination. It seems like it's the kind of guy that the Packers feel can fit in pretty well.
Yeah, in the Mountain West Conference, I mean, it's a good brand of football, but for whatever reason, I don't know if it's because of the time change or what, we don't really get a chance to watch a lot of it. I mean, I remember even when I was Boise State was in its big runs, like just trying to find a way to watch them was kind of difficult.
Yeah.
So yeah, I can't lie to you either and sit here and tell you that I've watched a lot of Nevada Wolfpack football, but when you do take a look, again, like I said, I think I mentioned this in Inboxer on the show, when these things get done, that's when I really do like to sit down and kind of not try to guess what Gutekunst and his scouts are going to do, but try to start to understand why they did it.
Yeah.
And that's why with Dobbs, it makes so much sense in terms of the guy hit the markers. I mean, obviously he's a 4th-round pick, but his production, that's no accident. I mean, this is a guy that really trusted his process in Nevada, and then when it was time for him to be the lead dog, he did it, and he did it at an extremely high level. Toure, for a 7th-round pick, is actually probably one of the more interesting players that I can remember the Packers taking, because this is a guy that you don't really know what to think, when guys come out of the FCS. We just talked about it, with Watson too. There's a difference in competition, but he did challenge himself. He went to Nebraska. He led the Big Ten, 19.5 yards per catch last season. He was a big play target, and they moved him all around. He's going to probably be more of a slot guy here. But as we learned, Mike, that's actually a huge opportunity for Green Bay. I mean, between the pre-snap motions, between the way that those guys can be utilized, and he's excited to get drafted. The third thing I was going to say before, and then I was going to get ahead of myself because we hadn't talked about these two receivers yet, is the Packers have on only a handful of occasions over the last 20 years have dived into a skill position group 3 times. And each time it's produced some pretty good results. I mean, it was 3 day 3 picks in 2018, but they did get Marquez Valdes-Scantling out of the 5th round, which was a tremendous find. They did it 3 times on day 3 in 2017, and you ended up with Aaron Jones and obviously Jamal Williams. The greatest story of all is 2014, because they let it off with Devonte Adams, and Adams ended up becoming one of the greatest receivers in team history. It's not a given you're going to hit on all 3. It's not going to be a given you hit on any of them. But giving yourself that many swings at the plate when you need a receiver, I really feel like that was the strong play here by the Packers.
And the Packers also, we had talked about it going into the draft, looking for some depth, some competition along the offensive line. And for the 3rd consecutive draft, Brian Gutekunst selects 3 offensive linemen. He gets, and all of these individuals played left tackle primarily to finish their college careers. And I'm talking about Sean Ryan from UCLA, who was chosen in the 3rd round on Friday night. And then 2 picks on Saturday, Zach Tom from Wake Forest and Rasheed Walker from Penn State. Now, the interesting thing is with the first 2 of these guys for sure, with Ryan and with Tom, there's positional versatility. A lot of analysts saying that Sean Ryan might be a better fit at guard in the NFL than at tackle where he played in college. And Tom, a guy who actually played a lot of different spots, including center in his college career. It sounds like Walker is more of a tackle, and that's his spot, sort of like Yosh Nijman when they brought him in as an undrafted player a few years ago. Nobody was really talking about him playing guard. Like this guy is a tackle. But what the Packers are setting up here is it's going to be, I think, some interesting competition along the offensive line. We had talked about sort of how things looked heading into the draft, but to me, yes, Yosh Nijman, I think, would be the front runner to start at right tackle. But one of these guys might be able to push him, compete with him. Yeah. We'll see how that shakes out. And with the versatility of guys like Ryan and Tom, maybe one of them challenges at a guard spot for either Royce Newman or John Runyon. I think John Runyon is maybe a little more solidified at left guard than Newman is at right guard, based on the way last season ended, where Runyon was playing in the playoffs and when Josh Myers came back at center and they moved Lucas Patrick over to right guard, and then Newman became the 6th man for the postseason. But I think there's going to be some interesting competition here. Now, I would still say the guys who have played in the NFL are your front runners. Yep. They're the guys that you would think would hold on to those spots. But when we were doing this show last year after the Packers drafted Royce Newman out of Mississippi in the 4th round, I don't think either one of us was sitting here saying, oh, yeah, that 4th-round pick out of Mississippi, he's going to be starting at right guard in week 1, right? Well, that's how it played out.
Yeah.
So we just don't know how this is going to go, but the Packers got some big guys up front for the depth that they needed based on, having lost Billy Turner, Lucas Patrick, not re-signing Dennis Kelly. The Packers lost a lot of experience on the offensive line in this offseason, and they're refortifying that depth chart.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Brian Gutekunst said afterwards, it's about trying to find your starting 5. And with these moves that Green Bay made, they give themselves a bevy of options to do that. You talk about last year not thinking that Royce Newman would be playing as much. We didn't know that Elton Jenkins was going to end up being at left tackle. We didn't know that when Jenkins went down, it was going to be Yosh Nijman for 8 starts at left tackle.
Right.
There were so many things that I don't think you could have prepared for last season that it reiterated why you need to have contingency plans. They lost Josh Myers for 11 games. Luckily for them, they had put all that time, that sweat, equity into developing Lucas Patrick as a center. Well, when Patrick leaves, now you got to find guys who could potentially play center, especially with Jenkins still on the mend. That's where you look at a guy like Zach Tom coming in, a guy that has that in his back pocket. Yeah, maybe doesn't have the traditional, type of size you look for in there, but his athleticism, again, this is becoming a common thread here, is off the charts. Him and Ryan, their verticals were the 2 highest of anyone at the NFL scouting combine.
Yeah, 300-pound guys putting up like 30-plus inch
33 inches.
Yeah, vertical jumps.
That's better than some receivers in this draft.
Yeah, that's hard. It's hard for me to even picture that, quite frankly.
I mean, it's pretty remarkable what those guys were able to achieve. So, I mean, that's explosiveness, that's power. It's being able to get underneath the shoulder pads of your opponent. I'm excited for them. And honestly, I'm excited for this entire group because Packers hope they're going to get it, and knock on wood, will get Elton Jenkins back at some point this season. They want that to be a really difficult decision where Elton plays once he's back. You hope everything turns out well with David Bakhtiari. As Brian Gutekunst has said, he thinks that everything's going to be fine in that regard. He'll be good to go for training camp, and we can get this train back on the tracks. But they have so many guys, Mike, that have played so many different positions. And I can't remember the last time they've had, 8, 9 guys on a roster who have all been draft picks? Because you talked about them taking 3 straight drafts with 3 straight offensive linemen, and they're all basically here still. It's going to be really interesting to watch.
Yeah. Matt LaFleur and his coaching staff, Adam Stenovich as offensive coordinator, Luke Butkus as the offensive line coach, they would love nothing better than for the day that Elton Jenkins is back from his knee injury and is ready to play, that it's not obvious where he should play, right? Because they've established the depth, they have their guys. Elton Jenkins is going to play when he's ready to play because he's a Pro Bowler and he can be a Pro Bowler at a number of different positions. But if it's not an easy call, that's going to be a good thing for the Green Bay Packers.
I get a kick out of this too because you're absolutely right about, hey, where does this guy measure up? Should he move inside? Like, it's funny, you go back 9 years ago, they were thinking David Bakhtiari was going to be a center. Not the Packers, but some scouts had him pegged as a center. You never know until you know.
Yep.
But the thing that Green Bay has done such an exceptional job at is they let him go out there and figure it out. Royce Newman he wasn't lining up at right guard earlier in the training camp. He was at right tackle behind Billy Turner.
Yeah, I was writing about Newman in the spring because when he was drafted, it was okay, he's a guard tackle prospect, and when I was writing about him in the spring, it looks like Newman's going to get his first shot at tackle. Well, by the time training camp rolled around and things really got going into the preseason, it's like, oh, this guy's got a chance to start at guard as a rookie in week 1 on a Super Bowl contender. So you just never know.
It's called football. You have to figure it out.
All right, well, we've run pretty long for today. Our producer Marv is going to be mad at me, but anyway, we'll sign off from here. We'll talk a little bit more about the draft on our next show, but for now, that's a wrap on Packers Unscripted. For Wes, I am Mike. All kinds of coverage of the draft. If you didn't see what we did over the weekend, and credit to all of our team at Packers.com, the video guys, our interns, all our technical people. There is so much out there on these draft picks on Packers.com. Be sure to check it all out. And with that, thank you for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next time.